You don't lust for bodies. Not really. You don't lust for touch, for image, for contact alone. You lust for relief, for reversal, for restoration. You lust for a moment where you are no longer governed by your own fracture. Pleasure is not the goal. The goal is momentary sovereignty, a moment where the body forgets who taught it shame, a moment where you are not being watched by the internal gaze that makes every movement about worthiness, a moment outside the split between what you feel and what you allow. Lust is not about having, it is about becoming. It is the unconscious reaching up through the skin, saying, "Let me out, let me speak, let me taste," even for one moment, what freedom feels like. You think you want the person, but really, you want the feeling they represent. The fantasy you built around their silhouette, the symbol your psyche wrapped around their presence. You want to dissolve, to lose your edges, to fall back into the pre-verbal before structure, before rules, before identity. You want the right to exist without apology. You want power over your own hunger. That's the real seduction, not domination of the other, but the end of inner conflict. Lust is an echo of a wish too old to trace. It is the adult form of a child's unmet need. It is protest. It is grief. It is the scream turned inward for so long that it began to sound like desire. The erotic is not a signal of immorality. It is the unconscious seeking restoration. It moves through images, through flesh, through the imagined permission to stop controlling everything. But you don't talk about that. You reduce lust to the body. You laugh it off. You shame it. You try to sanitize it into something more manageable. Romance, flirting, fun. You hide the trembling. You hide the psychic vertigo. You hide the primal need for one moment, one where you are not divided against yourself. The body knows what it wants before the mind does. And what it wants is often not the person. What it wants is the collapse of vigilance. That is why the fantasies feel holy. Not because they are pure, but because they are honest. And honesty, in a world of performance, is always sacred. This is not about giving in. This is not about acting out. This is about listening to the root of your ache, to the memory that the ache protects, to the exile that lives behind your eyes, waiting to be invited home. You think you want sex, but what you want is release from the unconscious tension between desire and repression. Freud called this the conflict between the id and the superego, the instinct to feel versus the inherited voice that says, "You must not." This isn't about power in the modern sense. It's about psychic integration, about lifting the weight of internal prohibition so that desire can return to its source without shame. Lust is what happens when the soul fights its way through repression and claws back a piece of itself from the wreckage. It's not about climax. It's about contact. And the contact you need most is with the part of you you had to silence to survive. So let it speak. Let it show you who you are beneath the editing. Let it lead you not into chaos, but into the truth that lives just beyond permission. Because what you lust for isn't pleasure. It's power, not over anyone else. Just the quiet, unspeakable power of finally being whole within your own skin. You thought the lust was the problem, but it was the clue. A flare shot from the unconscious saying, "Look here, feel this." Remember what you buried. And if you followed it, truly followed it, not into fantasy, not into gratification, but into its source, you would find not indulgence, but rupture. The desire was never about the other. It was about the return to a part of you so silenced, so banished, so malformed by shame that it had no other way to speak but through arousal. You weren't seeking pleasure alone. You were replaying an internal conflict, one that began the moment your instincts met the law. In Freud's terms, it wasn't about freedom to be. It was about surviving the split between the pleasure principle and the reality principle. To be angry, to be wild, to be incoherent, to want what you were taught to refuse. The erotic, for Freud, was not a portal to truth, but a symptom of what the psyche could not process consciously. It was the disguised expression of unmet needs, wrapped in fantasy, pushed through the cracks of repression. The body does not invent lies. It keeps score. It remembers where you flinched, where you swallowed a scream, where you laughed to make the danger pass. And when it desires, it does not ask the ego for permission. It simply reaches. Desire isn't rational. It isn't noble. Freud saw it as the raw energy of the id blind, urgent, unfiltered. But in its eruption we find a map, not of wisdom, but of repression. The more shocking the desire, the clearer its roots in a history of denial, because that is the fracture. That's where the real work begins, where you stop trying to match your identity to your impulses and instead ask, what part of me is trying to come home through this ache? You do not need to act on your desire to understand it. You need to listen. You need to slow down. You need to stop moralizing every tremor of your body. You are not impure for wanting. You are unfinished. And desire is your mind's way of remembering the blueprint, the one that existed before fear rearranged your foundations. You want to be held in a certain way. You want to lose control in a certain way. You want to take or be taken in a specific shape. That's not sin. That's symbol. The unconscious speaks in metaphor. Your fantasies are its syntax. They're not literal. They are layered. And if you treat them like surface craving, you will miss what they are actually pointing to. A power you lost. A role you were never allowed to play. A pain you never digested. Lust is a memory with the volume turned up. It's not new. It's familiar. That's why it terrifies you. You've been here before. Not in this body, but in the atmosphere of this need. In the longing for wholeness. In the forbidden thrill of self-ownership. And it's too much. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that owning your body meant risking your place in the world. So you split. You compartmentalized. You became two. One who behaves and one who dreams. Now you live at war every day between the one who craves and the one who censors. Between the one who aches and the one who performs stoicism. You live in that gap, and every symptom, every compulsion, every avoidance, every obsession is the echo of a bridge never crossed. But now, you're being asked to cross it, not recklessly, not blindly, but consciously, to turn toward the ache without acting it out, to name what lives beneath it without shrinking. This is the psychoanalytic task. to no longer confuse impulse with identity, to no longer reduce desire to behavior, to no longer punish yourself for wanting a home in your own skin. You thought this was about lust, but it is about language. The body is trying to speak, not in words, but in heat, in tightness, in images that flood your mind before your superego can catch them. You don't need to fix this. You need to understand it, and then you need to stay with it, because that is power, not acting, not suppressing, but holding your truth without needing it to be pretty or palatable or approved. That is where you begin to rule from the inside out, not over others, but over the war within you. We continue deeper into the psychic architecture, where repressed desire doesn't vanish, but mutates into neurosis, into anxiety, into symptoms you never link back to your longing. The desire was never dangerous. What made it unbearable was the guilt you attached to it, the shame, the self-surveillance. Now, we begin to untangle that circuitry, word by word, not to destroy your structure, but to understand how it was built. Repressed desire does not disappear. It calcifies. It coils in the psyche, pressed under years of moral camouflage. And then it reemerges not as lust, but as symptom. You think you're tired. You think you're overworked. You think you're anxious about deadlines, or the future, or some vague existential weight. But what if the exhaustion is psychic? What if you're not tired from life, but from holding yourself back from it? What if every symptom is a negotiation with denied desire? You avoid eye contact. You over-apologize. You dream about transgressions you would never dare to enact. You find yourself inexplicably angry at people who simply inhabit their freedom. And all the while, your conscious mind says, I'm fine. I'm disciplined. I'm a good person. But the unconscious doesn't care about discipline. It cares about balance. And when the erotic is disowned, when the desire is silenced, when the fantasy is never given audience, it returns through the side door, through the back of the mind, through the body. This is how guilt is installed, not as a boundary, but as a guardrail around your very aliveness. Because to want what you were told not to want is to risk everything you were taught would keep you safe. So you trained yourself to feel shame at the first flicker of hunger. You made repression a virtue. You said no not to others, but to yourself. And that no became your baseline. Even now, even when you're alone, even when no one's watching. That's the tragedy of internalized guilt. It no longer needs an audience. You carry your own censor now, inside your skull, on a loop, so when desire arises, it doesn't reach for connection. It slams into guilt, and guilt wraps it in disgust, in fear, in confusion. You think, why am I like this? Why do I want what I shouldn't? But that voice, the one asking why, isn't really you. It's a composite of every early gaze, every disappointed silence, every implied rule that taught you your desire was dangerous. You don't need to obey that voice anymore. You need to recognize it, name it, deconstruct it, because underneath it, your true desire is still untouched, still intact, still yours. Not monstrous, not obscene, but orphaned. It does not need to be indulged. It needs to be integrated. This is where the psychoanalytic frame becomes essential, not as a practice of behavior, but as a practice of facing, to look at your desire without flinching, to track it back to its root, to sit with the image that awakens you, without turning away, not to shame it, not to act on it, but to say, I see you. I remember what you once protected. I am not afraid of you anymore. This is not spiritual. This is structural. The unconscious is not moral. It is symbolic. And every fantasy is a code. When you decode it, you find your history, your conflict, your exile, your need. And when you stay long enough to understand it, and you change. Not overnight, not dramatically, but quietly, at the level of gaze, at the level of presence, at the level of who you are, when you want something deeply. And what changes most is your guilt, not because it vanishes, but because it loses authority. You feel it arise, and you don't collapse. You name it, you witness it, and then you choose from a place that includes it, but is no longer governed by it. That's power, not domination, but sovereignty. To want and not flinch, to see your hunger and not rush to moralize it, to live in your body without asking permission. You don't have to act it out, but you do have to own it, because whatever you don't own will own you. We'll now continue the descent, marked clearly with bold structural cues, just as you asked, to help you follow the architecture of the unfolding voiceover. We move now into the next layer of the monologue, trauma's effect on desire, the substitution of performance for intimacy, and the quiet discipline of becoming real, not innocent. We continue into the distortion. Trauma doesn't erase desire. It twists it. It tangles longing into fear, touch into threat, closeness into danger. You don't stop wanting. You stop trusting the want. You split from it. You treat it like a stranger in your own chest. So you perform instead. You curate your presence. You give just enough. A smile here, a clever line there, a soft vulnerability wrapped in charm. And you call that connection. But underneath, you're watching yourself perform. A loop within a loop. Intimacy becomes theater, because real intimacy would cost too much. It would mean letting someone see you, not the version of you that's rehearsed and likable, but the raw, neurotic, unfinished one. The one who still flinches, still freezes, still feels unsafe inside their own body. So you adapt, you seduce, you become masterful at being seen without ever being touched. This is how performance replaces intimacy. And the world applauds it. They call it charisma. They call it confidence. They call it success. But you feel the silence. You feel the absence of being met. You feel the echo. Not because no one is there, but because you are not there. Your body is present. Your performance is perfect. But your truth is exiled. This is not your fault. This was survival. When intimacy was once unsafe, your nervous system learned to choose control over closeness, to offer access without surrender, to simulate connection while staying hidden. But the ache doesn't stop. The longing still surfaces in dreams, in symptoms, in unspoken fantasies, because the real you never died. It just went underground, beneath the performer, beneath the perfect survivor, beneath the one who always knows how to please. And now, the work begins. not to be more open, not to be more pleasing, but to be more real, to let go of innocence, because innocence was never truth. It was obedience. You don't need to be good, but in Freud's terms, you also won't ever be whole, not entirely. The human psyche is conflictual by nature. What you need is not harmony, but awareness, to understand what you repress and why. You need to reclaim the one inside you who still knows what it means to feel without apologizing. This is the beginning of self-reclamation, not in one leap, but in micro acts of defiance against the false self you were praised for. You stop smiling when you're not amused. You stop agreeing to preserve harmony. You stop performing safety when you feel danger. You stop touching when you want to pull away. And slowly, moment by moment, you come back, not to a better version, to the original one, before the world asked you to trade your reality for acceptance. You will not be innocent anymore. You will not be perfect. You will not be smooth. But you will be here, and you will be yours. That is intimacy. Not a merging, not a transaction, but the shared space between two people who no longer perform their humanity for each other's comfort. We continue faithfully, slowly, deliberately, as we move deeper into the psychic terrain. As requested, the reflective cues and questions I pose, the ones that signal the next descent, will be written in bold so you can distinguish them easily. You've stopped pretending. You've stopped performing. Now you must learn to stay in a world that trained you to flee every time you got too close to your own truth. Because here's what no one tells you. Love isn't safe until grief is allowed. You cannot receive what you never mourned not having. You cannot trust what you still expect to vanish. So love enters, and you brace, not because you don't want it, but because every part of your body remembers what came after it last time. The letdown, the rejection, the withdrawal, the slow erosion of your voice. You never stopped loving. You stopped risking. And that risk to be felt, to be mirrored, to be wrong in front of someone, and not be left, that is the holy terror of being real. And it doesn't come from your mind. It comes from your nervous system, the same system that learned, in early rooms and quiet neglect, that presence is conditional, that affection is earned, that safety is staged. So now, the work is grief. Grief for every version of love you had to shrink yourself to keep. Grief for the mother who was present but unreachable. Grief for the father who said the right things but never looked you in the eyes. Grief for every moment you taught your body to disappear because connection demanded it. This grief is not weakness. It is realism. It is the necessary mourning that clears space for actual love, not fantasy, not rescue, not performance, because fantasy isn't the enemy. Fantasy is freedom when it stops being your escape, when you stop living in it and start listening to it. Every fantasy is a code. It carries the shape of your desire, unfiltered, unmoralized, unsanitized. Not a blueprint for action, but a mirror of what's been missing. So don't act on every fantasy, but don't dismiss them either. Ask them, what do you represent? What are you here to show me about the kind of life I haven't yet allowed myself to live? And from that place, from that interpretive honesty, fantasy becomes revelation, not escape. not compensation, but language. And what it speaks, when you really hear it, is this. You no longer need a climax to feel alive. You no longer need a savior to feel whole. You no longer need to break to feel real, because the truth does not live in intensity. The truth lives in containment. To contain does not mean to suppress. It means to hold, without panic, without evacuation, without handing it to someone else to resolve. To contain your desire, to contain your grief, to contain the rise and fall of need, without being overtaken. That is mastery, not of others, of self. You do not need to be understood to be valid. You do not need to be clean to be honest. You only need to stop running from your own interior every time it feels unfamiliar. And if you can stay long enough, quietly enough, you'll notice something. The ache softens. The grip loosens. The thing you thought would destroy you was just a memory, waiting to be seen. That healing is not victory. It is fidelity to your own depth, to your own truth, to the parts of you no one stayed for. You thought healing would feel like light, but it feels like weight, the sacred gravity of not abandoning yourself when everything in you wants to disappear. This is the last illusion to fall. Innocence. Innocence was never your birthright. It was your mask, the face you wore to make others comfortable with your silence, to prove your worthiness by being easy to love. But now, you are not easy. You are not innocent. You are not smooth around the edges anymore. You are real. You are textured. You are unfinished, but intact. You say things you can't unsay. You feel what others are too afraid to name. You lose people who only knew how to love your echo. And still, you stay. Not because it's noble, but because you finally understand. Truth is safer than performance, even when it costs you. You don't need to be good. You need to understand, to witness your contradictions without being undone by them. Wholeness, in Freud's terms, isn't resolution, it's awareness. You don't need to be worshipped. You need to be witnessed. You don't need to be explained. You need to be lived. And you are, finally, living, not pretending, not coping, not projecting your pain into every open hand that looks like love. You've reclaimed your hunger. You've stopped translating yourself for people who never learned your language. You no longer need to be decoded to feel human. You've stopped negotiating your need. You've stopped apologizing for your weight. You've stopped calling your depth too much just because others stayed shallow. You've stopped chasing innocence. You've chosen integration. And in that choosing, you found power. Not the kind that conquers, the kind that stays. Through the storm, through the shame, through the inner silence that used to send you running. Now, you stay. And in that staying, you become someone. The child you were, never had. Someone who does not leave. When you are ugly, when you are afraid, when you want what no one else understands, you do not abandon yourself. Not for approval, not for love, not even for peace. You carry your contradictions. You speak without flinching. You love without disappearing. You remember what it costs to live this way, and you pay it willingly, because there is no other life but the one you live in full contact with your own center. And now you are in contact. with your pain, with your power, with the parts of you you buried, because the world didn't make room for them. You made the room inside yourself, brick by brick, word by word, refusal by sacred refusal. And now you breathe here, not above it, not beyond it, but with it. This is the end, not of work, not of suffering, but of forgetting. You remember now who you are, what you wanted, what you had to give up to survive, and what you are no longer willing to lose, to be accepted. No miracles, just presence. No rescue, just responsibility. No innocence, just integrity. And it is enough. You are not saved. You are not fixed. You are not pure. You are conflicted. And that is the truth Freud trusted most. There is no final form, only the courage to face your impulses without surrendering to them and without denying them either. You are not perfect. You are not at peace. You are in process. And that is enough. Let them call it selfish. Let them call it unruly. Let them call it whatever helps them stay asleep. But you are learning to stay awake to your own complexity, to your contradictions, to your unconscious not as an enemy, but as a language still being decoded. You are not here to be smooth. You are not here to be understood. You are here to be honest with yourself. That is what Freud called insight. Not peace, but clarity. Not stillness, but structure. Rebuilt from fragments, once exiled. You walk now, not as someone whole, but as someone no longer hiding from their fracture. And that is power. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that tolerates ambiguity without collapsing. That is the last word, and it doesn't promise salvation. It promises contact with what you lost, with what you feared, with what you now dare to name. And that is enough, because even endings echo, and even after the last word is spoken, the psyche still listens. You are not returning to the world as you left it. You are returning as someone who no longer needs to disappear inside it. Someone who sees the patterns and chooses not to repeat them. Not out of defiance, but out of remembrance. You remember what it's like to betray your body for belonging, to sacrifice your truth for safety, to twist yourself into a version small enough to be kept, but silent enough to never be known. That memory no longer controls you, but you honor it. You carry it with you, like a scar that no longer throbs, but still tells the weather. You don't rush to forgive what cut you. You don't need to demonize it either. You simply stop giving it your voice. You speak now, not for them, but for the parts of you that never got to speak. You speak to the mirror, to the dream, to the fragment of self that still wonders if it's safe to exist. And you say, yes, now it is. You've stopped asking for proof. You've stopped waiting for permission. You've stopped outsourcing your sanity to those who never earned your trust. You listen now to a quieter authority, the one inside, the one that doesn't bargain, the one that doesn't scream, the one that simply knows when to walk away, knows when to stay, knows when a silence is sacred, and when it's a cage. You don't need a map anymore. You are not lost. You are not late. You are not broken. You are layered. You are vast. You are mythic, and no diagnosis, no doctrine, no disapproval can make you forget what you remembered in the dark, that you were never too much, that your longing was never the enemy, that your ache was always the doorway, and that the life you were told to suppress was always the one that could set you free. You walk differently now, not because the world changed, but because you are no longer negotiating your presence in it. You walk like someone who knows that no truth, once seen, can be unseen, that no self, once recovered, can be erased, that no love, once reclaimed from fantasy, will ever again be mistaken for salvation. You are not safe. You are not healed. You are not done. But you are real, and real is enough. Let them call it selfish. Let them call it unruly. Let them call it whatever they need to avoid confronting their own reflection. You are not a puzzle to be solved. You are a tension to be held. And the work as Freud saw it is not to purify the self, but to recognize its multiplicity. And you are living now, not cleanly, not perfectly, but completely. This is the last word, and it belongs to you, because now you speak it from wholeness. You don't need another revelation. You don't need another breakthrough. You don't need to tear yourself open one more time to prove you're trying. You've already come home, not to peace, but to presence. You are not here to be healed. You are here to stop abandoning yourself. In the name of being understood, let them misunderstand you. Let them project. Let them go. You don't need to be explained. You don't need to be softened. You don't need to be small. You only need this, to keep your truth close when the room goes quiet, to breathe into the space where you once used to disappear. You've searched your entire life for someone who wouldn't flinch when you showed them your insides. Now you see that someone is you. You are the witness, the container, the return. The beginning was never out there, and neither is the end. It's here, in the silence after the ache, in the steadiness after the storm, in the knowing that nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be removed. You are not waiting. You are not performing. You are not explaining. You are finally being, and that is the end.